A young clerk stood hesitating, phone in hand, about to call the police on an elderly homeless man sitting outside the store. The old man said nothing, just clutching his worn canvas bag, eyes gazing into the distance. At that moment, a man walked in and burst into tears. It can't be. He saved me from a burning helicopter back in 1968. Would you see differently if you someone once saved an entire squad? Welcome to QH. Let's uncover what really happened. Noah Barnes, 22, worked the night shift at a small convenience store in suburban Kansas. With his neat appearance and punctual nature, he was the epitome of reliability. His manager, Ms. Whitmore, trusted him completely to handle any situation that might arise during those quiet hours between midnight and dawn, especially when it came to dealing with the homeless people who occasionally wandered in. Remember, Ms. Whitmore had instructed during his training 6 months ago, if anyone loiters for more than 15 minutes, especially those homeless types, call the police. We can't have them scaring away customers. For nearly a week now, Noah had noticed the same elderly man appearing outside the store each night around 2 a.m. Unlike the other homeless people who sometimes asked for change or rummaged through the trash, this old man never approached anyone. He would simply sit on the curb across from the entrance, clutching a faded canvas bag to his chest, his eyes fixed on something no one else could see. Tonight, the weather had turned particularly unpleasant. A light drizzle fell, and the temperature had dropped enough to make Noah pull his store-issued jacket tighter around his shoulders when he stepped outside to bring in the newspaper stand. The old man was in his usual spot, seemingly unbothered by the cold rain soaking through his thin jacket. "He's back again," muttered a middle-aged customer as he paid for his coffee and cigarettes. "You should run him off. Probably some drug addict. Bad for business." Noah nodded politely, but after the customer left, he found himself staring through the glass doors at the old man. There was something dignified about the way he sat perfectly still, never begging, never causing trouble. After another hour passed with no other customers, Noah decided to approach him. He grabbed a cup of hot coffee from the machine and stepped outside. "Sir, would you like some coffee? It's cold tonight." The old man didn't respond. Up close, Noah could see his weathered face more clearly, deeply lined with a scar running along his jawline. His gray hair was neatly combed, despite his otherwise disheveled appearance, and his eyes, though focused somewhere far away, had a startling clarity to them. "Sir, do you need any help?" Noah tried again, extending the coffee. Still no response. The old man didn't even look at him. Noah returned inside, the untouched coffee in his hand. He watched through the window as the old man continued his silent vigil under the increasingly heavy rain. Something didn't feel right about calling the police. This wasn't some aggressive panhandler or drunken troublemaker, just a silent old man who seemed lost in his own world. But rules were rules. Ms. Whitmore had been clear, and Noah needed this job to help pay for community college. With a sigh, he picked up the store phone and began dialing. Just as his finger hovered over the final digit, the store's doorbell chimed. A middle-aged man in a business suit hurried in, shaking raindrops from his umbrella. "Nasty weather we're having," he remarked, heading toward the coffee section. Noah mumbled agreement, his finger still poised over the keypad. The customer filled a large cup with coffee, and then, as he turned to approach the register, he glanced through the front window. The effect was instantaneous and profound. The coffee cup slipped from his hand, splashing hot liquid across the floor, but the man didn't seem to notice. His eyes were fixed on the elderly figure outside, his face transformed by shock. "Sir, are you okay?" Noah asked, reaching for the paper towels behind the counter. But the customer wasn't listening. He moved to the door in a trance-like state, pushing it open and stepping halfway outside, still staring at the old man. "It can't be." His voice cracked with emotion. "That's impossible." Noah followed, concerned and confused. "Sir, do you know him?" The man turned to Noah, tears now streaming freely down his face. "That man, he pulled me from a burning helicopter in Cambodia. 1968, we all thought he died in the jungle 3 days later." Noah looked back at the phone in his hand, suddenly aware of how close he'd come to making a terrible mistake. "I was about to call the police on him," he admitted, shame coloring his voice. "Thank God you didn't," the man whispered, his eyes never leaving the silent figure in the rain. "That man saved my life and the lives of 3 others. I've been looking for him for 50 years. Sometimes one decision can change an entire lineage. Are you ready for that?" The man introduced himself as Colton Hayes, a retired Marine Corps officer who now worked as an insurance executive. With hands that trembled slightly, he pulled out his wallet and extracted a worn black and white photograph, protected in a plastic sleeve. "This is him," Colton said, his voice thick with emotion. "Walter Keegan. The day before our helicopter was shot down." Noah examined the photo carefully. It showed a group of young soldiers, arms around each other's shoulders, grinning despite the obvious exhaustion in their eyes. Colton pointed to a tall, broad-shouldered man in the center of the group. That's Walter. He was our squad's radio operator, but he was strong as an ox. When our helicopter crashed, he went back 3 times into the burning wreckage. Noah looked from the photo to the elderly man still sitting motionless in the rain. The resemblance was there in the set of his shoulders, the shape of his jaw. But the vibrant young soldier in the photograph seemed worlds away from the silent, weathered man outside. Are you sure it's him? Noah asked gently. Colton nodded firmly. I'd know him anywhere. We all thought he died on a reconnaissance mission 3 days after the crash. His body was never recovered. Colton stuffed the photo back into his wallet and strode purposefully toward the door. Noah followed, curiosity and concern mingling in equal measure. As they approached the old man, Colton slowed, emotion seeming to overwhelm him again. Colton called softly. Walter Keegan. For the first time since Noah had noticed him days ago, the old man's eyes shifted focus, moving slowly until they rested on Colton's face. A flicker of something, recognition perhaps, or simply awareness passed across his weathered features. It's me, Colton Hayes. Do you remember? Lockening, Machen saw Tom. The old man's eyes narrowed slightly as he studied Colton's face. His lips parted, but no sound emerged. Then, with painfully slow movements, he reached into his canvas bag and withdrew a small metal object that Noah recognized as military dog tags. You kept them all these years, Colton whispered, tears flowing freely now. My God, Keegan, where have you been? We all thought you were dead. For several minutes, Colton simply sat beside Walter on the wet curb, neither speaking. Noah remained in the doorway, transfixed by the unfolding scene. Eventually, another customer pulled into the parking lot, breaking the spell. Colton helped Walter to his feet. I'm going to take him to my home for tonight, Colton told Noah. Can you tell me how long he's been coming here? About a week, Noah replied, always at the same time, always just sitting there. Colton nodded thoughtfully. He must have been looking for something familiar. My office is just around the corner. I sometimes stop here after working late. He glanced at Walter, who had retreated back into his silent world. I can't believe it. 50 years, and I find him by accident. As Colton guided Walter toward his car, he turned back to Noah. You have no idea what this means. This man, he's the reason I'm alive, the reason my children and grandchildren exist. Noah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Just minutes ago, he had been about to call the police on a man who had saved lives, a forgotten hero. The next morning, Noah was still processing the previous night's events, when Colton returned to the store, this time with dry clothes and a purpose in his eyes. I've taken the day off, he explained to Noah. Walter stayed at my house last night. He barely spoke, just a few words here and there, but it's definitely him. Colton shared what little he had learned. After being presumed dead in Cambodia, Walter had somehow made his way back to the States, but the war had changed him. He suffered from what would now be recognized as severe PTSD, making it impossible to reintegrate into society. Rather than burden his family with his broken mind, as he called it, he had chosen to disappear. He lived in homeless shelters on the streets, in temporary housing, moving whenever his nightmares got too bad or people asked too many questions. Colton explained. He never claimed his veteran benefits, never reached out to the military community, he just existed. Over the next few days, more pieces of Walter's story emerged. A local Cambodia Veterans Association representative visited Colton's home and confirmed Walter's identity through military record. The official story of his death in action was corrected, and the process of restoring his benefits began. Word spread through Colton's social circle, and soon other veterans came to meet the man who had been a ghost for 5 decades. One elderly former pilot recognized Walter immediately. You're the guy who pulled Johnson out of that downed Huey when nobody else would go near it, he exclaimed. They wanted to give you a silver star for that, but you had already disappeared. Walter received these accolades with the same quiet dignity with which he had endured years of invisibility. He spoke little, but his eyes now tracked conversations, occasionally lighting up with recognition at a name or event from the past. A week after their reunion, Colton brought Walter back to the convenience store to thank Noah properly. I've been thinking about what would have happened if you had called the police that night, Colton said gravely. Walter might have panicked. He's had bad experiences with authorities. He might have run, disappeared again. I might never have found him. Noah, who had been replaying that same scenario in his mind, nodded solemnly. I almost did it, you know. My finger was right on the last digit when you walked in. Walter, who had been standing silently beside Colton, suddenly spoke, his voice rough from disuse but surprisingly clear. The boy with the scar on his left eye, he said, looking directly at Colton. You were trapped under the radio equipment. Colton froze, then slowly raised his hand to the faint scar that ran from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone. You remember? I remember all of you, Walter replied quietly. Every face, every name, every night. The two men embraced, a half-century of separation dissolving in that simple human contact. Noah stood watching, witness to a reunion that should have been impossible, that almost never happened, all because he had hesitated to make that call. I don't know about you, but this part really hit me. Type respect if it moved you too. The next morning, Colton returned to the convenience store, with a local reporter from the Midwest Herald. The journalist, a thoughtful woman in her 40s named Dana Rhodes, had been skeptical when Colton called her with the story, but her expression changed the moment she met Walter Keegan. There's something about him, she whispered to Noah, while Colton and Walter sat at a small table outside the store. You can feel it, can't you? The weight he carries. Noah nodded. Over the past week, he had found himself thinking constantly about Walter and the twist of fate that had brought him and Colton together. He explained to Dana how close he had come to calling the police that rainy night. One phone call, Dana mused, jotting notes in her small pad. That's all it would have taken to keep this reunion from happening. Her article titled The Ghost of Loch Neen, Lost Hero Found After 50 Years, appeared in the Sunday edition. By Monday morning, 3 local TV stations had picked up the story, and Walter's face, both his youthful image from Cambodia and his current weathered visage, was being broadcast across the Midwest. The media attention brought unexpected revelation. A retired firefighter from Springfield called the newspaper office after seeing Walter's picture. That man saved my nephew from a gas station fire in 1984, he insisted. I never knew his name. He disappeared before the ambulance arrived, but I'd recognize those eyes anyway. A Cambodia's woman, who had come to America as a refugee, contacted the TV station with a similar story. In the refugee camp, he would sit guard at night, protecting the women and children, she said through an interpreter. We called him the Silent Guardian. He never told us he was a soldier. More stories emerged. Walter pulling a child from a frozen pond in Minnesota in the winter of Walter working tirelessly at a hurricane relief center in Florida in 1998. Walter guiding lost hikers to safety in Colorado. Each account painted the picture of a man who moved like a shadow through America, appearing in moments of crisis and disappearing before he could be thanked or recognized. The community's response was immediate and overwhelming. A local veterans organization offered Walter permanent housing in their residential facility. A lawyer volunteered to help navigate the complex process of restoring his military benefits and securing the back pay he was owed. A medical team at the VA hospital created a specialized treatment plan for his PTSD. Through it all, Walter remained largely silent, occasionally speaking to Colton in quiet tones, but mostly observing the whirlwind around him, with an expression that mingled confusion and gentle resignation. 2 weeks after the story broke, a national news program featured a 5-minute segment titled The Forgotten Hero. The piece went viral, accumulating millions of views online, and sparking a national conversation about how America treats its veterans, particularly those with invisible wounds. Noah, who had never sought attention, found himself unexpectedly in the spotlight when the news crew interviewed him about that fateful night. I almost called the police, he admitted on camera. It was store policy with loiterers. If I had made that call, he couldn't finish the sentence. The producer later told him it was one of the most powerful moments in the segment, his unfinished thoughts speaking volumes about how easily Walter might have slipped away forever. On a sunny Saturday 3 weeks after their reunion, Colton organized a small ceremony at the local Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall. 24 former service members, ranging from Cambodia veterans to recent Afghanistan returnees, gathered to officially welcome Walter back into the brotherhood he had left behind half a century ago. The mayor presented Walter with a key to the city. A representative from the Pentagon announced that his military records had been corrected, and that he would receive the Silver Star that had been approved, but never awarded in 19. A local congressman pledged to use Walter's story to push for improved mental health services for veterans. As the ceremony concluded, an unexpected visitor arrived. 8-year-old Liam Garza, grandson of the firefighter whose nephew Walter had saved in 1984, approached the old soldier with a crayon drawing. It showed a stick figure pulling another from bright orange flame. My grandpa told me you're a real superhero, Max said, offering his artwork, but not the kind with a cape, the kind no one knows about. Walter accepted the drawing with trembling hands. For a long moment, he studied it in silence. Then, to everyone's surprise, he knelt to the boy's level. Not a hero, he said softly, just a man who couldn't walk away.
That evening, as the gathering was winding down, Colton found Noah standing alone by the refreshment table. "If you hadn't been standing right there that night," Colton said, "I would have walked past him. I would never have known." Noah looked down, still uncomfortable with his role in the story. "I almost caused him to disappear again, but you didn't," came Walter's voice from behind them. Both men turned, surprised to find the usually reticent man had approached them. "You hesitated. That was an—" Noah met Walter's gaze, finally seeing past the weathered exterior to the steadfast courage that had driven this man through decades of solitary wandering. "Why did you sit outside our store every night?" Noah asked, a question that had been nagging at him for weeks. Walter's lips curved in the ghost of a smile. "The light," he said simply. "Your store sign, same color as the emergency lights on our choppers. Felt like home somehow." Noah sat in the break room later that week, holding a worn napkin. Walter had scribbled. It wasn't a letter, just a sketch, a memory from the jungle, a chopper overhead, and figures in silhouette below. Noah realized it wasn't about a rescue or recognition. It was about the truth that some heroes don't seek the light, they become it for someone else lost in the dark. Later that night, a documentary filmmaker who had attended the ceremony approached Walter with a proposal to tell his complete story. Unlike the sensationalized news segments, she wanted to create a thoughtful exploration of his life after Cambodia. Not just the dramatic rescues, but the quiet struggle of a man carrying unseen wounds through America's changing landscapes. To everyone's surprise, Walter agreed with one condition: tell it true, not just about me, about all the forgotten ones still out there. The resulting documentary, titled The Quiet Ones, would go on to win awards and, more importantly, spark a national movement to identify and support homeless veterans. Outreach programs were established in cities across America, specifically designed to connect with those who, like Walter, might be too proud or too traumatized to seek help themselves. As for Noah, he found his life irrevocably changed by that moment of hesitation with his finger over the phone keypad. He switched his community college major from business to social work, with a focus on veteran services. The scholarship fund, established in Walter's name, would eventually pay for his bachelor's degree. "Some people find their calling in dramatic ways," Noah would later say in his graduation speech. "Mine came in the moment I chose not to make a phone call." And Walter, for the first time in 50 years, he had a place to call home, a community that understood at least some of his struggles, and a purpose in allowing his story to help others. The nightmares didn't stop. Some wounds never fully heal, but they were balanced now by days filled with meaning and human connection. 6 months after that rainy night outside the convenience store, Walter sat with Colton on the porch of the veterans' residential facility he now called home. They weren't talking. Words had never been Walter's strong suit, just sitting together in the comfortable silence of men who had seen both the worst and best of humanity. "You know," Colton finally said, "I've spent 50 years wondering why I survived when others did. Now I think maybe it was for this. To be in that store on that night, to recognize you, to bring you home." Walter nodded slightly, his eyes on the sunset. "Maybe," he said. "Or maybe it was so that boy wouldn't make that call." What moment in your life did justice arrive late, but was still sweet? 6 months later, Walter Keegan had settled into a modest apartment in the residential community near his old fire station. The walls, once bare, now held carefully framed photographs, his Cambodia squad smiling despite the jungle heat, Colton, with his extended family at a backyard barbecue, and surprisingly a candid shot of Noah behind the counter of the convenience store, looking up with that moment of hesitation captured perfectly. Each Tuesday morning, Noah would stop by with coffee, black, no sugar, just as Walter preferred. These visits had begun as a courtesy, but evolved into a ritual both men valued. Sometimes Colton would join them, bringing donuts and news from the growing network of veterans who had connected with Walter's story. At the convenience store, the spot where Walter had sat that rainy night had been marked with a plaque, "The Quiet Post in honor of Walter Keegan." The store owner, moved by the story, had installed a bench and declared that any veteran who needed a moment's rest would always be welcome. The photograph of Walter embracing Colton was framed behind the counter, a constant reminder to Noah and the other employees: never judge someone based solely on appearances. Walter rarely spoke about his decades of wandering, but occasionally he would share a fragment of memory. These glimpses into his solitary journey revealed a man who had never stopped serving others, even when he himself was lost. A 5th-grade student from the local elementary school won a state essay contest with a piece titled, "Real Heroes Don't Need Their Names Known." The girl had never met Walter, but his story had inspired her to look differently at the invisible people in her community. When asked by a persistent journalist if he regretted all the years spent alone, Walter simply shook his head. I was where I needed to be, he said. Sometimes the best place to help is in the shadows. On Veterans Day, Walter stood before a small gathering at the residential facility's courtyard. For a man who had spent decades avoiding attention, public speaking didn't come naturally, but he had prepared a few words. A hero doesn't need medals, he began softly. They just need someone who remembers them. He looked directly at Noah as he continued. You may not know who they are, but they once saved the world. Silent. His final words would later be engraved on the memorial bench outside the convenience store. Be careful how you look at people, because sometimes you're looking at a legend without knowing it. Justice may be delayed, but it is never absent. Don't give up when you're doing what's right. What moment have you stood firm when the world stood against you? Share it now. Subscribe to QH Incredible Stories to see that truth and justice ultimately prevail. Share this video with someone who needs faith in doing the right thing. We told their story, you gave it meaning. Thank you.